Recording in progress.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you join, please turn your cameras on if you are able to do so. I promise it will be a much more fun experience for everyone if we can see each other. Hi, Danny.
How are you?
I'm wonderful, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well.
Hi, Stacy. Hi, Taylor. Hi, Astrid, Lindsay. Okay, let's see. About how many? We have 15. Well, we're about 3 minutes over, so let's go ahead and get started. So again, if you are able to put your camera on, I please do ask that you keep it on for the duration of the workshop. This is 2 hours that we're spending together. And I don't want it to be a one-way flow of information. I like to see head nods. I like to see if people don't agree with what I'm saying. I like that feedback, and also it makes it much more interactive. Ideally, we would all be in person, meeting with one another. And of course, when you go to a job interview, you go to meet with someone where you're using these techniques, you likely will be in person. And so I do ask that if you can turn your camera on, know that I love to talk with all of you. So I don't like referring to it as calling on you, but I do like to interact. So just know that's coming throughout the next 2 hours that we spend together. All right, so that being said, we have the next 2 hours together. So really, let's make the most of our time. I know how easy it is to become distracted with, phones or emails that keep pinging you. And sometimes those phone calls are important. So please, by all means, if it's an important phone call, take it. But let's put away Twitter. Let's put away Facebook. Let's put away Instagram. Any kind of distractions, because truly you owe it to yourself to learn these techniques. You will use them throughout the rest of your career. Even on a first date, some of these techniques may come in handy. So really, the next 2 hours, let's give each other the respect of really being present throughout this workshop. Again, stay mentally and physically present throughout the next 2 hours. I also want to hear from all of you. Every time I give these workshops, and trust me, I have given them, I could probably give them in my sleep at this point. I learned something from everyone in the audience. I like feedback. I like you to disagree with me. I want to know what you think about things. I want to know if some of the tactics I provide in this workshop are helpful to you or not. At the very end, I have a few slides on something that I didn't talk about before, and that's overcoming performance anxiety. As an anxiety sufferer, a lot of these techniques I've used on myself, and a lot of them were provided to me from people like you guys, providing examples of things that work for you. So please share ideas, ask questions. If you don't, at any point, come off mute and interrupt me. Call me Brittany. This is a very low-key workshop. You can use the chat function if you don't have access to a microphone. Perfectly fine. Just know I want this to be as interactive as possible. All right, so now let's go into the nitty-gritty of what elevator speeches are. So there are 2 parts to this. Typically, these workshops would be over the course of 2 weeks. Today, it's combined in a 2-hour session, which is long. I have a latte. I hope if you guys are coffee drinkers, you are ready for this rodeo that we're about to partake on together. The first part We're going to talk about what are elevator speeches, and equally important, what they're not. Elevator pitches are not a research presentation. We're then going to have an exercise. I'm going to show you examples, because sometimes like, well, what is an elevator? Like, I need to hear someone give one. Like, what is this thing? The elements of an elevator pitch. What are the important components that must go into them? I think sometimes when we talk about our research, we're so familiar with the subject that we use a lot of jargon, meaning we use language that a layperson couldn't understand. And B, we assume the listener knows all the backstory to our research when they may or may not. So that's why it's important to really look over every component of the elevator pitch and make sure to include them. A big part of that is, who are you, right? Who are you and who are you to discuss this topic? And then what is the problem? And why should we care? After that, I'm going to talk about audience engagement tactics. Helpful components. So these are analogies, these are anecdotes, which are essentially short stories that help illustrate your points. And then presentation tips. So, you know what, as an aside, an interesting story. What do you think? There was a poll in the Wall Street Journal, and they asked, what is your biggest fear? What do you all think was the #1 answer?
Public speaking.
Thank you, Stacy. Yes. People were more afraid of public speaking than going blind, right? That tells you something. So we're going to talk a lot about presentation tips and how to, and like specifically how to overcome performance anxiety. All right. Any questions up till now? No, I see Danny shaking your head. No, excellent. All right. So what are elevator pitches? They're essentially a commercial about you, your project, and your goals. And oops, there's a typo on here. You don't have a competition and it's not 90 seconds. Your elevator pitch is 60 seconds long and it is not for a competition. So please don't get scared. 60 seconds long, not a competition. It's more of an exercise. But they are important for every career level, right? So you guys are giving a 60-second one, but really, I don't want you to use this workshop just for that one opportunity and then forget everything. You'll find that a lot of the principles you learn in this, you will use, like I said, in an interview, research presentations, first date, you know, meeting new friends, anything like that. Very helpful. And that being said, they're tailored to the situation and to the context. So for example, for my research as a postdoc, I did high-grade brain tumor research at MD Anderson Cancer Center. So I had an elevator pitch for that. I'm on the national board of the Association for Women in Science. I'm a huge proponent of women in STEM. I have an elevator pitch for that, right? I have an elevator pitch for why I don't or do cry it out with my infant child, right? So you have elevator pitches for different parts of your life, right? Why you're keto or not, like all of these things, you can have an elevator pitch for. It doesn't just have to be science. Keep that in mind. And connecting back to something I touched on previously, they really do, putting an elevator pitch together and going through the exercise of doing that and touching on all those elements, it really does allow you to connect to your project and your goals. Because how many of you, first of all, how many of you work in a research lab, like a wet lab? Anyone? Yes, I see nods. Stacy's nodding. Let's see, I'm going to scroll down. Yes. No. Stop. Yes. Yes. Awesome. How many, or let's see, how many of you, Beatrice, yes, go throughout your research career and you just kind of, you show up, you do the thing, go home. The next day you show up, you do the thing, you go home. The next day you showed up, you do the thing, you run 10 Western blots, you go home. And it's sort of the same thing over and over again. You set up a mouse experiment, you go to the mouse facility, you do your mouse work, and then you go home. And it sort of like is like Groundhog Day every single day. And if someone asked you, like, why are you doing this? It would take you a minute, like, what? Why am I doing this, right? Because you just do the same thing over and over and over again. So the nice thing about an elevator pitch, it reminds you of why you're doing it. So if you're looking for a new protein in cancer development, you're doing it for the patients, right? You're trying to find a therapeutic for these poor families who have a family member that's afflicted with some type of cancer or neurological disease. I mean, that's why you're doing it, right? And it really helps you remember that and embody that, and it will help motivate you to continue on to do the thing every single day, to go to the mouse field. You're like, okay, I know why I'm doing this, and what I do, most importantly, matters. All right, I just want to make sure, Beatrice, do you have a question with your hand up, or were you putting your hand up because you work in a wet lab? Ah, I see it went down. Okay, excellent. Okay, now more than ever, we need to relearn how to communicate. So when you go to a restaurant, what would you see now that you wouldn't necessarily have seen in the 80s or 90s or really even early 2000s? What do you see now? You look around the restaurant, you're eating your chicken fried steak, you look around and people are doing things that you wouldn't normally have seen. You wouldn't have seen
on the phone.
The phone.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Is your name Nee? Is that how?
Yes, me. Or you can just call me Ivy. I tried to change it, but it didn't let me change it.
Oh, no problem.
Sorry.
Yes, no, not a problem. Yes. And I see some in the chat. Cell phones. Yes, Celeste. You see this, right? This is something that you wouldn't have seen before.
Yeah.
Because it's an easy thing to do, right? Here we go. You see this, like kids are looking at you on your phone, right?
Yep.
You see groups of friends who are all on their phone or their tablet, right?
Yep.
And then you see this. You see couples together that don't necessarily talk to one another, but they have their phones, right?
Yep.
And I love this. This may date me a little bit. If The Breakfast Club was remade today, it would be a silent film about 5 kids staring at their smartphone. If you have not seen The Breakfast Club, it is a fantastic movie. I hate to say it's a classic because I feel like I'm dating myself, but it's a really great movie.
Yeah.
So communication has no doubt gotten easier. It's so easy. It's easy to send a text, email, FaceTime even, but communication has not gotten better. And it severely hindered our ability to have even difficult, crucial conversations face to face. So I challenge all of you on this call today, the next time you're in an elevator, don't immediately stare down at your phone and pretend like the other person doesn't exist, but just say hello. And the more frequently you do this, the more confident you will become in speaking to strangers, but also just being a friendlier person, and it will allow you to relearn that communication skill, which is so, so important. Okay. So why do you need an elevator pitch? You guys obviously know why you need one, right? Because you have to present to your executive committee, I believe, and so you have to do this. But like, that is one little blip in the rest of your career. What if, whoops, that's a little aggressive scrolling. What if you were in line at your favorite coffee shop? I personally like Starbucks, just me. And you see the person standing behind you is the dean of the school you're trying to get into. And they ask you, oh, hello. And you're so nervous and you're not prepared that you say, hi, and then you look down, you get your vanilla soy latte, my favorite, and you walk away. And that's it. Or let's say you were prepared, right? And you had your elevator pitch because you'd practiced it a million times before. And so when they said hello, you could say something like, hi, my name is so-and-so. Actually, it's a wonderful honor to meet you. I would love to tell you a little bit about my research if you have a moment, right? How amazing if you could be so bold. You almost just had an informal interview. And I promise you that will make a bigger impression on these people, then any hello will do that they will probably forget you the next day, right? So that's why you just never know when you're going to need it. So the more that you can practice it, the better. How about this? This is another great movie. The first time your spouse's in-laws, right? This is a very awkward conversation that took place. So if he would have better thought of what he wanted to say, then it wouldn't have been so uncomfortable. What if your PI came walking around the lab as you're working on something, or a visiting professor? Or what if you were in the elevator and the president walked in? What would you say? Would you be so nervous that you would be nervous, but amazing if you had a pitch lined up? Elevator speeches are not a research presentation. They're not a means to impress upon someone how many Western blots you've run, or flow cytometry experiments, or distillations, or whatever. That is not what they're about. You don't want to go through hours of methods, of jargon. You don't want to bore them to death. That is not the point of an elevator pitch at all. And this is the biggest problem that a lot of trainees, even faculty, have when putting their elevator pitch together, because they assume, like I said before, the listener knows, and they may or may not, and they assume that they understand your language, your scientific language, which most lay public doesn't, right? So this is why it really does take a lot more thought than just simply showing up and spewing words for 60 seconds. Okay, now we're going to do a little exercise. So get your pen and paper, write down in one sentence only, write your research question. What is your question? In one sentence only, write how you plan to answer that question. In one sentence only, write about what good it is going to do. I'm going to give you guys 3 minutes to do this. Okay, who would like to volunteer first to share?
I can go try to kick it off.
Yes.
So for context, I and a couple of my teammates here are not researchers, but we do work in the Office of Research Innovation at our university at UT Dallas. And so our kind of role is to help our researchers out. I am, though, we're doing a big semiconductor project and I'm knee deep in it. So I just kind of went that way with it. So just as some context. Okay, so your research questions, and my research question was how can we improve workforce development for semiconductors in North Texas? How I plan to answer the question in one sentence was a little hard, but we are going to leverage the community colleges, industry, and other expertise to further the workforce in this space. And then what good is it going to do? It's going to improve the semiconductor industry based on the federal funding that's happening, and will get represented minorities, hopefully good jobs. So that's the way I went.
Excellent. Thank you. Big round of applause. Going first is always a scary thing. So thank you for doing that. So I'm going to ask, let's see, is it Aretha Lafayette? Can you please tell me what Danny just said?
Danny's question was, how can we I'm trying to think of how to put it. I'm sorry, give me a second. How can we create opportunities for people to, or for researchers to create semiconductors? And her plan was to utilize semiconductors, or to create opportunities for minorities in people who may not have those opportunities to work in an industry with semiconductors. And what good is it going to do? It's going to have an impact on the ability to get semiconductors in the US.
You did an excellent job.
Thank you.
Excellent job. So this is an important exercise, right? Because if you want to know how you are coming across to someone else, the best way to answer that question is to have someone repeat back to you what you think you said. That is the best way. And I'm going to continue to say this over and over again throughout this entire workshop. The best practice you can do for an elevator pitch is to give it to someone outside of your field and ask them to repeat back to you what you just said. And one way that I would take this a little further, this is more for Danny, would be the research question. You can think about it as like, what is the problem? And is there a problem that there are not opportunities for underrepresented minorities in semiconductor workspace? Is that right? So you want to, if you were to put together an elevator pitch, you'll want to frame your pitch with, this is the problem, and it's a big problem, and have the listener really, like, even if I don't know the first thing about semiconductors, right? But you want to elicit that emotion in me, like, oh my gosh, I need to support Danny and her ability to do this because it's important what she's doing. Even if I'm not in that field, it's important. And one other thing I want to mention, as you're going throughout your elevator pitch, I barely want to hear the word we. If I hear the word we, it's only in the very beginning, like the research lab, blah, blah. Everything after that is, I am doing this. My role is this. This is about you. And I know that's an uncomfortable thing to talk about sometimes, but you want to say what your role is. Okay, is there someone else who would like to volunteer?
I have a question.
Yes.
For Danny, I think with the since you say one sentence, I think Danny's sentence is a little bit long.
Yeah, and it's okay. So this is
That's
just
okay,
an
okay.
exercise. Yes, this exercise is more to illustrate the point of how important it is to have someone repeat back to you what you
Okay.
said. Because in general, when I do this, and you did a very good job, Danny, if you have like let's say you have your project is very, very, very basic science heavy, meaning like you're doing electrophysiology on neurons from a culture of whatever. And so your science is so niche to where when you say these sentences, you use that jargon to where then if I were to ask someone to repeat back, they're like, I have no idea what they said because I don't even know what the words meant, right? But that's why this exercise is so important. Okay, does anyone else want to give their examples?
Well, I can because I think I am similar to Danny. I am not a postdoc or a graduate student. What I do work in a wet lab and also as a high throughput drug discovery screening core. And so I'm just a research specialist. So for the first one, instead, like you say, a research question, which I don't have because we work with too many PI with like a very broad cancer project. So I would turn that into, as you say, a problem question instead of a research question. So my question would be how to expand our core abilities and credibilities. And to answer, how do I plan to answer that question is I or we, as I always use we, as in we always work as a team. And if I go do an elevator pitch, it's always a team. So I get used to saying we here. We would target different funding models and different PI around the Texas Medical Center and get our names out there. And third, what good it is going to do, it will give our collaborator option to expand their research in the drug discovery realm.
Excellent job. So I have some things I want to mention, but before I do that, does anyone want to volunteer to repeat back to me what she just said? Anyone? Oh, in the chat. Can we start with the problem is short? And we'll get into the nitty gritty of elevator pitches, but yes, this is just an exercise. So who went? Bryce, how about you? What did she just say?
I think that I struggled a little bit, and that's probably on me just for focus, but the beginning of it was basically about how she doesn't really work on something, an individual project, but she works with, a number of labs. And if I remember correctly, her focus is not necessarily about a research problem in particular, but more about how they can, help the labs that they work with. That's on me, I think, not really on her presentation of the.
No, that's great, Bryce. I think you got the gist actually quite well. So a couple things. First, I'm going to challenge you guys a little bit. That is a research question because she's researching the best ways to get their name out there, right? So that people understand what they're doing and they know what their capabilities are. So that is a research question. And again, in the beginning, we talked about how elevator pitches aren't necessarily just for science. They could be for anything. And then next, I'm going to push back a little bit more on yes, you always work as a team. Of course you do. In anything that you do in life pretty much is a team effort. But the elevator pitch is what you are doing. When you go to a job interview, the person asking you the question wants to know what you did, right? They don't want to know what everybody else did because they're not hiring everyone else.
Right.
They're hiring you. So for example, in this example, my role was to put the flyers together that had all of our capabilities and put them around the Texas Medical Center. whatever your specific role is, it has to be outlined. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, let's move on a little bit, but I hope this exercise impressed upon you how important it is for that kind of feedback. It's not only in conflicts, right? So like when my spouse and I come to a disagreement and he says something to me and I'm like, oh, I'll say like, what I heard is this, and this. Is that what you intended to say? It's the same thing when it comes to an elevator pitch. Okay, so now I'm going to share my sound and share a couple examples of elevator pitches. And as I share them, I want you all to make mental notes of aspects of them that you really like and maybe aspects of them that you don't like as much. So take notes and write them down and be prepared to share. Now let's see if I can. All right, I think I'm gonna have to, just a second. Let's see.
What if I told you cancer mutations are contagious? My name is Michael McGuire. I'm a fourth-year graduate student in the cancer biology program. Recently, it's been discovered that cancer can spread its mutations to nearby cells using little packages called exosomes. Since I started grad school, I've been interested in how cancer can shape its environment in order to sustain its growth. Just like people turning on air conditioning, cancer likes to adjust its surroundings to just the right amount, but it requires help from nearby cells to do so. By studying what happens when cancer's cellular neighbors uptake its mutations, we hope to explain how cancer so perfectly calibrates its environmental thermostat. After delivering mutations to supporting cells commonly intermingled within cancer, we observed it causes them to induce inflammation, which creates a comfortable atmosphere that allows cancer to grow and spread. Interestingly, we also figured out how cancer packages its mutations, which allows us to set up a spam filter that can sort out packages with mutations in them. This can turn off cancer's thermostat and expose it to harsh environmental conditions. Not only does this make it harder for cancer to grow, but also renders it more susceptible to drugs like chemotherapy. We're now targeting this process in mice using drugs that shut down cancer's ability to package its mutations. Once this is confirmed, we'll exploit cancer's exposure to its harsh environment and attack it with chemotherapy. I'm Michael McGuire, and this is my elevator speech.
All right, what did you guys like about that? Or not like? What are your comments, your thoughts?
Hi, I'm Andrea. One of the I didn't like, I really liked his elevator speech. What I didn't like was when he said cancer is contagious, which it's not, but like the way he worded it was really weird to me, and I couldn't stop thinking about it whilst he was talking.
Yes, very good. So that statement seemed controversial to you and it sort of irked you a little bit. Yeah, and that we'll get into controversial things and why they're not a good idea. And then I see Melissa said the analogies. Yes, Melissa, I love the analogies.
He seemed very confident in his presentation. I like that.
Yes, Aretha, very confident. Lots of information packed in less than 2 minutes. Yes, Lima. Yeah, Danny.
I thought it was a good research pitch, and maybe not necessarily an elevator pitch, just because it was like kind of a formal introduction and things like that. And that may not usually what happened. And then literally just going back to what you said, I could not have repeated anything that he just said. But if I was in the zone of listening to a research pitch, in which I do a lot, it would have been a little different for me.
Very good. Yes, and it's interesting. There are lots of different styles, whether you say your name right at first, or if you wait to say your name, or if you say your name at the end. There are a lot of different styles and strategies. Say the name twice, the listener would remember. Yeah, good point. What else did you guys like or not like? Did anyone notice the hand gestures?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would say that gesture.
Yeah, he had some great hand gestures and his eye contact was spot on. Spot on. So I know that you guys are taking this workshop not for a competition, but I'm sure somewhere along your career, you will have the ability to join an elevator pitch competition at some point. And a lot of times there are like video auditions, at least we do it, that's the way we do it at MD Anderson. And you'll notice his obviously was filmed, but you could still see his hand gestures. So if you ever do have to be in a competition or in some means of being filmed, know that you can still, right? You can back up a little bit and still include those hand gestures. Yes, he was relaxed and he was confident. Yeah. Let's see. And he had fantastic, I know someone said this already, but his analogies about the thermostat, the little packages, the exosomes being called little packages. Yes, great. Okay, let's go now to the next example.
At Frontgate, we believe that little rituals
Next up, we have Jill Harlan from UD College of Arts and Sciences.
What do you think when I say the word innovation? Maybe light bulbs, heating, computers, or even Fitbits come to mind. What do you think when I say innovations of the future? Hoverboards, teleportation? Well, actually, the answer is ionic liquids. According to a poll in the UK, ionic liquids were voted the #1 innovation to shape the 21st century. Ionic liquids are salts, just like the table salt you'd sprinkle on your popcorn. But instead of being solid, they're liquid, and this gives them an insurmountable number of applications. Have you ever walked down the street and seen that black gook that was once chewing gum, now forever ingrained in the sidewalk? Ionic liquids can easily remove that. Have you ever heard the high-pitched beeping of the fire alarm, telling you it's time to change the batteries, and wishing that batteries lasted longer? Ionic liquids are being studied to increase battery life. Have you read or heard in the news about the importance of capturing greenhouse gases in order to save our planet? Well, that's where my research comes in. I study ionic liquids for carbon dioxide capture. Right now, what's currently being used is toxic and corrosive. Ionic liquids could be the superhero of gas capture. They can capture more carbon dioxide and be less harmful than what's currently being used. Can you taste the future? If my research successfully reveals an ionic liquid that can efficiently capture carbon dioxide, then they could fulfill their potentials as innovations of the future, and they could improve our world. Thank you.
I love that one. I smile every time I listen to it. All right, what did you guys think about that one?
I love that she started with an engaging question to pull her audience in.
Yeah. I see her energy.
We've all heard that robots are taking over the job market. But what if I told you that retail and manufacturing aren't the only industry?
Okay, what else? Yes, I see Andrea, your hand is up.
Yeah, I really like that she was like really into it and her body language, and it made me want to listen. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I spaced out a little bit at the beginning, but then she really like, oh, like I really wanted to listen and pay attention to what she was saying.
I love that. Her enthusiasm for what she's doing was so contagious, right? If you can tell, like, when someone is so excited about something and they believe in it, right? They get so excited about you immediately are curious. Like, why do they like that so much? Right? Before they even say anything, just knowing how much they love what they're doing, it becomes intriguing.
Yeah.
And I see Stacy said she used common items to bring us in and had jokes throughout. Yes. Real life applications. She got us thinking about lots of problems and convinced me that her research could work. If I could hire her, I would. Yes, Lindsay, me too. Me too. High impact in the use of real world applications for her work. intonations drew me in. Yes, Tiffany. Astrid said, great background before mentioning her research question. Yes. Right? Because if let's just be honest with each other, right? If someone came in and said, ionic liquids are important, you should give me $100,000 so I can go study them for carbon capture. What? Like, why does that have anything to do with me, right? But no, that would be my first reaction. But she set up the significance using real world examples that related to me. When you speak with someone and you illustrate a problem, the person needs to know, how will that affect me, right? How will that affect me? Why is this important? They empathize with you, right? And they understand, like, oh, okay, now I get it. That's why that's important. One other thing I wanted to mention, and this is so important, and really why I love this example, she has a lisp. And a lot of times when people think about doing an elevator pitch competition or whatever, they say, I would never win because either I have a speech impediment or English is not my first language, I would never win. Or I'm too high pitched, I would never be able to do that. And that's simply not true. It is not true. And I love the fact that she won first place. She has a list that you may or may not even have noticed because of how confident she was. There was another example actually at Rice of an astrophysicist at some business competition. And the example used to be online and I can't find it anymore. But English was not his first language and he won the competition as well. So don't let that hold you back ever from anything that you want to do. Please don't. Any other thoughts about hers?
One thing I noticed is her attire. Like she's comfortable what she's wearing. You know, like it's not you have to dress up when you do any like an elevator pitch.
She was comfortable, right? She was comfortable in what she was wearing. She was very confident. I wish I had that kind of confidence sometimes.
Right. Yeah, sometimes I have that notion like, all right, you're gonna make a pitch, you're gonna dress nice so people take you seriously.
And what that tells you is it doesn't matter what you look like, it matters what you say.
Right.
It matters how you act. That is so much more important than any other aspect. All right, let's now move a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of the element. And Lee Wen, if we could mute your microphone, I hear a little bit of back. Thank you. Excellent. Perfect. Okay, so these are the elements of the elevator pitch. Number one, who are you? Right? And how are you? Why do you have the credential to talk about whatever you're going to talk about? Meaning, what is your name, obviously? What is your academic position? Are you a graduate student? Are you a postdoc? Are you a scientific administrator? Are you a program manager? What lab, research group, or department are you affiliated in? To sort of orient the listener to who you are. Every time I say this, I think of Alice in Wonderland. Who are you? I think of it every time. Anyway, part two. What is the problem? Obviously, is there a problem or a question? And we know the answer to that is yes. What do you think the answer may be? That would be your hypothesis. How are you going to find out? Those are your methods. And then what has happened so far? Those are your results. For you to know, in giving an elevator pitch, you don't need results. Let me repeat that. You don't need any results. You don't need any results to win an elevator pitch competition. You can say, I anticipate to find X, Y, Z. That's a nice thing about an elevator pitch, as opposed to a research presentation. Importantly, why do we care? Why would anybody care about what you're talking about? This is a significance, right? This is so important. And where does the research go next? Obviously, your future directions. So now I'm going to walk through a very sort of rudimentary example to give you a little bit of context about what all of these different elements mean. Name. My name is Annabelle Smith. And this is also another example of why elevator pitches don't have to be necessarily scientific. What is your stage of training or your rank? I have been a dog owner for 5 years. So Annabelle clearly knows a thing or two about dog ownership, right? So immediately off the bat, she's no dog novice mom. What is your lab research group or department? I live in the subdivision of Briar Cove within the city of Memphis. This is totally made up, but it just orients you. Annabelle, dog owner for 5 years, and she lives in Tennessee. Okay, cool. What is the problem? What's the situation? Our family dog Barley has been itching uncontrollably over the past few days. Well, that's a big problem, right? Is there a problem or a question? The uncontrollable itching is making Barley uncomfortable and it is leading to hair loss. I don't know what's causing the itching. What are you going to do about it? I'm going to find out what is causing the itching. What's your hypothesis? I think it's fleas. How are you going to find out what it is? Well, these are your methods. I'm going to analyze his hair for the presence of flea and flea debris. I'm going to wash him with flea shampoo, treat him with flea medication, and monitor to see whether the itching stops. So what's happened so far? Well, so far, I was able to see what appeared to be fleas and flea debris. I saw a decrease in itching 5 days following treatment with the shampoo and flea medication. These are your results. Why do we care? What does it mean? Because the itching stopped following treatment with flea medication, I believe the cause of Barley's itching was from a flea infestation. Why should we care? So what? If it is fleas, the excessive itching could lead to welts and sores, resulting in a possible infection. The fleas could infect our furniture. It could potentially infect our cat Figaro, who also lives in our home, right? So this is clearly a big problem. No one likes bugs. Gross. And that is actually my cat. He's very cute. Okay. Whoops. Where does the research go next? I'm going to look for the cause of fleas by analyzing their presence in our backyard. I will also discuss with neighbors to see if they are suffering from a similar problem. I will discuss preventative measures to take with our veterinarian on how to best prevent flea infestations. So this is a very non-scientific elevator pitch illustrating a problem. I'm not Annabelle, but what Annabelle did to investigate it and where it will go next and why it's important, right? So this is a good example of all the separate elements. Any questions about the example? No. Okay, now, like that's great, Brittany. It's a elevator pitch about a dog and fleas. What does a real elevator pitch look like? So if I were to go ahead and write down an elevator pitch, not worrying about jargon. When I say jargon, I mean using scientific language that a layperson couldn't understand. So I'm a neuroscientist by training. I have a PhD in neuroscience. So I learned essentially a new language throughout my PhD that I could speak, and my mother, who is in the jewelry business, would have no idea what I'm saying, right? But the first time you put your elevator pitch together, I don't want you to necessarily think about the jargon. I just want you to get all the components down. Meaning, like back to our dog example, all the components were there. That's the first thing that I want you guys to focus on when you're putting your pitch together. So let me give an example. My name is Dr. Brittany Parker Kerrigan, and I'm the Associate Director of Research Planning and Development at MD Anderson Cancer Center. My overall goal is to find a cure for brain cancer. So that's who I am. Now we go into the background. 15,000 people are diagnosed with glioblastoma every year in the United States and survive 14 months with the current standard of care consisting of chemotherapy and radiation, which themselves have immense off-target side effects. We're already getting into the jargon, right? Standard of care, like what? What is standard of care? I don't know what that means, right? Let's keep moving along. I'm setting up the stage. That's the problem. Part of the problem in eradicating these infiltrative tumors is that we don't understand the molecular underpinnings of the disease. And currently available therapeutics lack the ability to effectively cross the blood-brain barrier reaching the tumor. Lots of jargon, but getting the points down. So now we've set up the problem, the significance in the problem. Here we get into the meat. To combat this problem, I am investigating whether we can use bone-derived MSC exosomes, which the Lang lab has shown home to brain tumors, to deliver potent and specific inhibitors of a specific oncogene known to drive glioblastoma growth. Specifically, I hypothesize that mesenchymal stem cell-derived exosomes can deliver siRNA to FGFR3 TAC3 positive glioma cells and will lead to their subsequent eradication. To test this hypothesis, I treated FGFR3 TAC3 positive cell lines in vitro with exosomes electroporated with siRNA to this fusion and performed cell viability assays. So far, I have found that treatment successfully decreases cell viability in 3 different cell lines and blah, 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 blah. You get the point, right? So this is the methods and what I saw, lots of jargon, and this is actually my postdoctoral fellowship project, FYI, right? If found to be efficacious in animal models, then this treatment paradigm could potentially serve as a potent and more effective way to treat glioblastoma while sparing the deleterious side effects of the current standard of care. Wow, lots of stuff there, but all the elements are there, right? Every element that needs to be in the elevator pitch is there. We just need to translate this to English, right? So we have, let's see. Who are you? The background, the gap in knowledge, the purpose, hypothesis, method, results, and future steps, and significance. All the elements are there. So now what we're going to do is for the next 15, let's do the next 10 minutes. I want you guys to either A, take a bio break if needed, and then B, come back and start outlining your elevator pitch. I don't want you to worry about jargon at this point. I don't want you to worry about analogies. We haven't gotten there yet. I just want you to write all of the elements out. And actually what I can do to help you, I'm going to show the elements on the screen so that you can, and then I know that the handout has been shared with you as well. So I would recommend taking a peek at that if you have it open. But if not, I'm going to go ahead and share it. Let's see. Here we go. And then there we go. Okay, I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes. Okay. Let's all come back. How did that exercise go? Did anyone struggle with any component? We're pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so now you guys have your skeleton, right? You have all the elements there. And one thing that that slide didn't show is the gap in knowledge. It's implied with what is a research question, but know that the gap in knowledge is important because that is the question, what you're trying to solve. Okay. So as an FYI, I know that you guys are not doing a competition. Know though that after this, you might as well, if there is a competition that you can enter yourself into, because you would have already done the hard work. This is in general what a score sheet would look like if you were to go compete. And just for you to know, as you're even preparing for this 60-second pitch. In general, there are 3 separate criteria. If I were hosting the competition, this is what I would look for. So the content is essentially what we just did, right? The exercise that you guys just spent doing the last 10 minutes. Are all of the elements there? And then the delivery, is the enthusiasm there? And remember, enthusiasm doesn't have to be like smiley, jumping around, cheerleading enthusiasm. It can be if that's your style, but it doesn't have to be. Enthusiasm can be serious enthusiasm as well. And then the overall impact. So this is just an example of how a judge would judge your elevator pitch. Okay, and again, we all came back from a break, so let's make the most of our time together. If you can turn your camera on, please do. Please interact with me, ask questions, come off mute. This is informal. Now we're going to move into what I think is the fun part of this workshop, and it's audience engagement and helpful components. So analogies and anecdotes, and then finally, the piece on, I am so nervous to do this. How do I overcome this, Brittany? Like, I am so scared to get up in front of anyone. There has to be a way I can learn how to do this. And I'm telling you there is. As someone who used to be absolutely petrified, and I still get very nervous before I present, but I do these tips and it helps me calm down and walk myself through it. Okay, we just went through this. As you go throughout your elevator pitch, it's important that you distinguish your role from the parent project. What are you doing specifically? You can acknowledge the project or the group or the team or the field or whatever, but you need to rapidly narrow down to what you are doing, because your elevator pitch is about you and your role and your personal contribution. It's okay if someone else is doing the same thing you're doing, but you are still doing the thing that you were doing, if that makes sense. So that's what you need to talk about. And then another strategy is then at the end to re-expand back into, and this is sort of like getting back to the significance, re-expand into the greater field or what good it's going to do at the end. It's critical that the audience engages with you and invests their time in you from the beginning. So I'm going to ask you guys a question. When you go on YouTube and I personally like to watch makeup tutorials. When I go to watch a makeup tutorial or whatever, what normally happens at first? If I go to watch a video on something, what happens? Or what pops up?
Commercials.
Commercial, there's an ad, and you can like skip after a particular period of time. How many times have you found yourself just intrigued by the ad and you're just like, ooh, like, Like even before that front gate ad that showed up, like I need a new mat for our front of our house. I was like, oh, I kind of want to listen, but I don't think anybody else wants to, so I'm going to keep scrolling by, right? So advertisements have the amazing ability to hook you from the beginning. Even if I went to go watch a makeup tutorial, I still wanted to watch that thing because it was so interesting to me. It's the same thing with your pitch. From the very beginning, you have to get their attention. You need to be compelling and enthusiastic. And you may say, well, I am not very confident. That's okay. There's lots of strategies to help you overcome that and to even appear as more compelling, even if inside you're terrified. It's called imposter syndrome, right? A lot of people suffer from it, I being one of them. There's lots of strategies to overcome that. You want to be careful with uptalk. Now, the pointers I'm going to give you, I am not trying to change the essence of who you are and what makes you unique. That is not what I want to do. What I am going to do is to give you tools so that when you're speaking, it doesn't distract the listener. One thing that I used to do that was very common from the region I came from, I'm from Southern California, is when you're speaking and as you're talking, your voice trails off and it's like this constant question at the end of every statement. Like it never comes back down. It just continues to go up and up and up. I had no clue that I was doing this. And it took a mentor, a very, very kind mentor, to sit me down and say, I want to talk to you about something called uptalk or upspeak. Some people call it that. And it made me realize what I was doing. A lot of times people say, they say like, or things like that. And sometimes it's hard to even realize that you're doing it until someone tells you that you're doing it. So I'm going to tell you now, this is something just to be aware of, uptalk. That all being said, the audience needs to buy into both the story, but also to you. If you were to go buy a car and you go into the dealership and the person selling you the car says, well, you know, I really know much about cars or anything, but you know, this Hyundai, I guess, is fine over here, or you know, you could go for the Toyota over there. You know, I don't really know much about it, but I guess it's a good car. Are you going to feel confident that that person, you want to buy a car from that person? No, no. So the listener has to buy into both you and what you're saying and how you say it. There's a short amount of time. You guys even have less amount of time. So typically elevator pitches are 90 seconds. You guys have 60. That's not a lot of time. So there's no room for wasted moments. What are ways to get them on your side from the beginning or to hook them? Well, starting with a hook. You can start this by posing a question. You can mention something relatable, emotion provoking, right? So the example about the ionic liquids, she mentioned the annoying as all heck fire alarm that won't stop beeping. That elicits rage in me, right? Like legitimate rage, emotion. It's thought provoking, the significance. If she can fix that problem, oh my gosh, take all of my money, right? So it's relatable to me. You can consider using a relevant prop. Now, this is a little tricky. Usually, if you were to give an elevator pitch, like in an elevator or running into someone, you would want to use a prop that you would normally have on you. So like, for example, me, I'm like attached to my coffee cup, right? So if I wanted to use a prop, I could use a coffee cup or a pen or a phone. Bringing in another prop for the sake of bringing in a prop, I think is a little risky, but of course, this is your elevator pitch, not mine, just something to think about. Another thing you could think about for your hook is dispelling preconceived notions. Everybody thinks X, Y, Z, but did you know that's not true or something, right? Something to get them like, oh, interesting. What are they going to say next? Let's not be offensive, right? Never a good look. Let's not talk about anything controversial, religion, politics. Let's not do any of that stuff, because you know why? I loved how, was it Andrea earlier that said part of it, yeah, bugged her, because it's like, that's not even true. right? If you start off with something that's not true or doesn't jive, it just irritates you, I'm not gonna wanna listen to anything else you say. And it really will make me question your credibility, right? So don't do anything that is going to offend someone. Another thing too, I saw, and I need to find it, I saw a clip once about how people sometimes apologize continuously, right? They'll be in a meeting and say, oh, sorry, everybody's like, sorry, or, you know, they'll stop it, sorry, and they constantly apologize. Don't apologize, right? Don't apologize. If you have to start over, start over. It's not the end of the world. You don't need to apologize over and over again for that. Just keep going, just keep swimming. Ultimately, the goal is to capture the audience's attention and to get them on your side. Now, let's think about anecdotes and analogies. It's making ideas sticky. It's having people walk away from your pitch and having certain thoughts or parts of it stick to you, right? So back to our example of you're in line at your favorite coffee shop. You want the dean of the med school to remember you. You want to be sticky in their mind, right? To where when they go through all the applications, like, oh, you know, I remember Aretha. She was this very eloquently speaking lady that I spoke with in Starbucks. We should definitely have her be a part of the med school, right? That's what you want. You want these ideas to be sticky. So first, let's talk about anecdotes. So anecdotes are thought-provoking and it makes the listener feel something, you know, and there's lots of different ways that you can do this. So it could be they could help illustrate a point by sharing a short personal story. Essentially, what they come down to is they make you relatable. And you can consider a famous quote too. This is not something that I had shown before in these workshops, but I came to think, I'm like, oh, sharing a quote from someone would be a great way to hook people in. But you want to keep it short. You don't want your anecdote to take over your entire pitch. It's just a component of your pitch. That being said, a very good strategy is to introduce the idea of either an analogy or an anecdote at the beginning and then reintroduce it throughout your pitch. So it needs to be relatable, whatever your anecdote is. So it could be a short story of why you chose your field. It could be a great moment in your research, an instructive failure. Some of the best talks I went to as a postdoc are talks where the professor, this esteemed professor, got up there and said, and it just failed. It failed. It didn't work. Right? It's humbling. And it makes you relate to them because let's be honest, when you're in research or really do much of anything, a lot of times you fail at first or like over and over again. And so when someone admits that, you immediately empathize with them, like, oh, wow, like this, I relate to this person. It could be something that happened outside of research that informed your research direction, right? You could have a family member afflicted by Alzheimer's disease and it has motivated you to study a cure for it or something. So let's go in. Any questions? I know I just like flew through that quickly. Okay. So let's give some examples. My cute little baby up here. After having a child, it made me realize the negative implications of the anti-vaccine movement, and it motivated me to lead an initiative on science outreach. They're just examples. I began to notice a correlation between my high school friends who smoked and those who suffered from depression. I wondered whether a correlation between cancer incidence and the consumption of smoked meats may affect Texans. Right? So these are a sentence long. They can be longer than a sentence, but just examples of something like, oh, interesting. Like now I understand why you went into that or why you were curious about that. Here are some quotes that I found that could be interesting too to consider. A quote about never giving up. Impossible only means you haven't found the solution yet. I love that. Something about just because you aren't the first to do it doesn't mean it's not important. In science, the credit goes to the person who convinces the world, not to the person to whom the idea first occurs. Love that one. About thinking outside the box and using creative abilities to facilitate innovation in science. Every brilliant experiment, like every great work of art, starts with an act of imagination. I love that. About an overcoming a failure or not having data. Above all, don't fear difficult moments. The best comes from them. I love that. All right, so now let's move into analogies. Analogies are extremely powerful because it relates something abstract to something more familiar. And think back to our example of ionic liquids. It allows the audience to relate to your science, to more niche science, and it paints a picture in their mind using metaphors. But the audience needs to be able to get it quickly. Otherwise, it's not a good, if you have to explain your analogy, that's not a good analogy, or you just need to hone it a bit. They take time to develop it. Trust me, they are so worth it. And you'll want to develop it and test it on people as an exercise, meaning get feedback from people. Tell someone, you know, when I say this, what do you hear when I say this? You'll want to keep it short. Again, you don't want to have to explain your analogy. And you want to be sure it holds up across cultures to the best of your ability. And what I mean by that is, in some cultures, a dragon may be seen as a bad thing. In some other cultures, a dragon may be seen as a good thing. So these are just things to keep in mind to your best of your ability to have them hold up across cultures. I do a lot of going to speak to donors, a lot of it. As a scientist by nature, but now an elevator pitch facilitator, I have the ability to explain the science to a lay audience. And I use a lot of analogies when I do that for people to get the point and understand why a particular research method may be more strategic than another one. Let's go through some examples together. Chemotherapy, which kills all rapidly dividing cells, versus targeted therapy, which targets a specific mutation, could be like a firing squad versus a sniper. I like that one. If you have like a nanoparticle that you want to target to something, it could be a car with a GPS unit. Or if you have something in like astrophysics, relating an individual atom to a solar system. A few different examples. A lot of times when I talk to donors about glioblastoma research, and they go in with the notion that, well, if you just have surgery on the one tumor, then the whole brain should be fine, clear of tumors, right? Or if you just treat one of the tumors in the brain, that means the rest of the brain doesn't have any tumors. And I relate it to fire ants in your backyard. And I said, if you put fire ant killer on one fire ant bed in your backyard, does that mean your whole backyard is free of fire ants? And the answer is no. Those suckers will move somewhere else and populate. Glioblastoma is very similar to that, right? So I'm relating something that they can relate to, fire ants in Texas especially, and something like stage 4 brain cancer, which most people may or may not be familiar with and why it's so deadly and aggressive. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take about 5 minutes to create a hook for your project. And you can use any of these or other ideas that you have, and then we'll see how much time we have when it comes to discussing with the group, maybe 1 or 2 examples. Okay, does anyone want to share? Anyone struggling or want some help?
I can go.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, so I kind of have two different routes, but go with this one. So it's kind of a question. Do you ever talk to someone that is just so passionate about something, and after a while you are just like, I can't do this conversation anymore, but you just don't want to be rude and you don't know how to end it? Well, I don't know how to go from there, but basically I want to have researchers not drone on and on about their projects, but I'm going to be much nicer in my delivery of that. So basically the question was kind of like getting into an experience.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I love it. So relating to wanting to artfully bow away from a conversation and how to do that in a respectful way, or to how to allow them to be more concise and to the point. Yeah, perfect. I love it. I related to that very much. Thank you. Does anyone else want to share? Is anyone having a hard time coming up with something?
I actually went out on the internet and found a quote. Like Danny, I work with Danny, and I'm not a researcher. I work in the Office of Research and Innovation as a program manager. So I did struggle with it a little bit, but I just went and found a quote that would get me started with my conversation. And I support RCR, the responsible conduct of research. And so I kind of went along that line. And my quote is, science is a superpower, but without a humanitarian heart to guide it in the right direction, it always ends up doing more harm than good.
I love that. Oh my gosh, I got chill. I love that. I love that. That is,
Felt like that was a good start to the rest of my my little spiel I had there.
yes,
Thank
100%.
you.
Yes, because anyone, whether you're in science or not, they understand how important a moral compass is when it comes to research, and why these regulatory aspects are absolutely imperative. So I love that. I love that.
Thank
And I
you.
love how you can easily set the stage for why what you are doing is important, right? And that's the best, then that's the most important aspect of the elevator pitch. What are you doing and why is that important and why should anyone care? I love that. I love that.
Thank you.
Good job. I think I saw a hand go up. Suzanne, yes.
So I too work with Danny. So we're all one big happy team. And I went with the preconceived notion. So on the semiconductor stuff that Danny was talking about earlier, and I haven't had a chance to proofread it, but I'm just going to read it the way that I wrote it, because that's the way my brain works. But often jobs in the semiconductor field are seen by young people and their families as dirty, dark, and dangerous, not well paid, and repetitive in nature. In reality, these jobs are paid very well. Every day is different, and these roles are impactful on the U.S. economy and national defense, as well as ranked in the top 5% for workplace health and safety.
I love that. I love that. And I like it too, because as someone who wouldn't necessarily even know what a semiconductor is, you're still setting the stage to why it's important. And it makes me curious then. I'm like, oh, I wonder what you're going to say next about that. I love it. And I love that the dispelling preconceived notions is fantastic. I like that strategy a lot. Thank you, Suzanne. I love it. Okay, let's keep moving just to make sure we have enough time. And I definitely want time at the end if you guys have questions or need help. The hardest part about giving an elevator pitch, hands down, is the inability to not use jargon. What is that? Well, jargon are words or expressions that are used by a profession or group that are difficult for others to understand. It is the fastest way to distance you and your message from what they hear. If they can't understand what you're saying, they're not going to pay attention to what you're saying, right? And the best way to know if you're using jargon is to give your pitch to someone who's not in your field and have them repeat back to you. And that's why we do that somewhat uncomfortable exercise in the very beginning of that workshop to really illustrate that point, how you may think you're coming across as clear. But once you have someone explain it to you, either you didn't use jargon, but you're not compelling, so they weren't paying attention to you, which is the problem, or they were paying attention to you, but you used so much jargon, they had no, you might as well have been speaking a different language. It's the best way to find out. All right, so now let's go back to the example I had shown before from my postdoc project. And now let's try to look, there's a lot of jargon in this. I only highlighted some of it, but as an exercise, let's go through this and try to find different ways of saying things. So first, what is another way of saying glioblastoma?
Just brain cancer.
Brain cancer. That's one way, right? You could say the most common and deadly form of brain cancer in adults. Stage 4 brain cancer. How about, standard of care? What's another way of saying standard of care?
Treatment, maybe?
Treatment could be one of them. So I see in the chat treatment, yep. So it's the available therapeutic, right? So it's like the widely available, it's a standard of care, it's been vetted. Molecular underpinnings. This is like genetic stuff, right? So you could say, what specific changes occur in the DNA of brain cancer cells that allow them to be so aggressive? How is the DNA different in a brain cancer cell versus a normal cell that allows that cell to make millions of copies of itself, to move to somewhere else in the body, which we call a metastasis, right? I treated FGFR3 TAC3 cell lines in vitro. Or really, this positive cell lines in vitro, what does that mean? And I say this because the first time I said in vitro, I was explaining it to my mother, who again is in the jewelry business, not science. She said, Brittany, why are you, I thought you studied cancer. Why are you talking about in vitro fertilization? It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, what are you talking about? Like, this doesn't make sense. And I immediately realized, oh my gosh. When a lot of the lay audience, they hear in vitro, they think of in vitro fertilization or IVF, right? It's like two ships passing in the night. And that's why you have to tell someone, please tell me what I just said. So what's another way of saying this? How about I grew tumor cells from a brain tumor patient in the laboratory and treated them with the drug I created that specifically and potently targets this deadly mutation. So anything about cell lines in vitro, right? We studied it in the laboratory. There is in vitro. We studied it in a living organism in a mouse. That's in vivo. Let's see. Animal models. What's another way of saying, do you think you could say animal model and the normal person would be able to, not normal, if the lay audience would be able to know what you mean by animal model? That's sort of a trick question. The answer is no. A lot of people think model, they think like a model, like a runway model, right? Or like an art model. So what's another way of saying animal model?
Can you just say an animal?
Within an animal, yeah. Mice that harbor brain tumors or human brain tumors. Very, quickly you can say it. So now let's go into some presentation tips. As someone who talks rather fast, it's important to pause between sentences and not between words. I remember my mother growing up would say, you need to slow down and enunciate your words. And I took that as, and then I did this, and it's like unnerving, right? If you talk quickly, like I do, pause between sentences, allow them to digest what you just said. Don't pause between words, it will sound unnatural. Use gestures to help you remember and relax. You'll want to converse, not recite. That being said, a lot of us, including myself, before giving an elevator pitch may be nervous. And so memorizing it is really the only way it's going to happen for me. That's fine. But practice it enough to where you can throw in elements that make it seem more ad hoc and not like this rehearsal. You want to be careful with uptalk. And your enthusiasm is everything. Again, it doesn't have to be smiling, jumping around like a cheerleader, right? Unless that's your style, and that's perfectly fine. But know that you must be enthusiastic, like the ionic liquids person. She was so enthusiastic and she really cared about what she did. You want to be that electricity that make people interested in you, want to talk to you more, like, wow, that's so interesting what you're studying. Wow, that's so easy for her to do. But you know, I have anxiety. I hate speaking in front of people, right? I'm me, that's me. And I do this all the time, right? So what do I do to help with anxiety? Practice and practice and practice. What I almost always do, if I know I'm going to give a presentation in a particular room at MD Anderson or wherever, I actually go to that room ahead of time and I see the room and I study it. And then when I go home to practice, I close my eyes and I practice and visualize the room. I visualize the faces of the people I know who are going to be in that room. As much as you can visualize things, it will help with anxiety because it will seem more familiar. It will immediately allow you to relax more. There's immense amounts of research on belly breathing, right? Activate your parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest. Think of the way that you breathe. You push your belly button out as you inhale. So expand from your belly, don't breathe from up here. Breathe from your belly and imagine it like a wave coming and going, right? Exhale longer than you inhale. It will help relax you. So has anyone ever experienced a vasovagal reaction? That means like you're in a situation, you're so terrified that you immediately pass out or you think you're going to pass out for whatever reason, whether it's like the sight of blood or you don't have to answer. I'm one of those people. Sometimes if you're in a situation where you're so anxious that you're like, I think, yes, Tiffany, I've heard, and I haven't tried this one yet, but I heard that if you immediately tense all the muscles in your extremities, it pushes the blood up to your head so you don't feel like you're going to pass out. So this is another tip. There is a TED Talk by Amy Cuddy about power poses. And in this TED Talk, she explains how if you, before any scary event, scary meaning anxious, anxiety provoking, if you go to a quiet place, maybe like a large bathroom stall or something, and you make yourself as big as you can, you put your arms in the air, you stand like Superwoman, you know, you make yourself as big as you possibly can. It evidently increases your testosterone and decreases your cortisol. You immediately feel more confident. I have done this before. Is it placebo? I'm not sure, but I've done this before and it works for me. So it may work for you too. Just another tool in your toolbox. Evidently, your body has no ability to distinguish between when you are excited or when you are anxious. So when you go into a situation where you are highly anxious, tell yourself, I'm excited, I'm excited, I'm excited. I'm so excited. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. And just keep telling yourself that. And then it may even remind you to a moment like going to Disneyland or something. But it's supposed to help. I've used this before. It helps for me. Just another tool in your toolbox. Grounding strategies. Wiggle your toes in your shoes. Remind yourself that you are safe. You are connected to the ground. You are supported. Something else that I do is when I'm in a situation where I'm an anxious flyer on an airplane. So if there's turbulence or something, I close my eyes and I think of a place where I'm always calm. And that for me is my garden. So I'll just sit there and say, I'm in my garden. I feel the sun on my face. I hear the birds tweeting, and it immediately will calm me down. No matter what, I don't care how much you think you've memorized it and you're good to go. Print your speech on a note card and put it in your back pocket. No matter what. I don't care how confident you are. Do this. Why? It is psychological safety net, because you know it's there. You know it's there. Worst case scenario, you read the card. The world's not going to end, right? Just have it there. Have it there in case you need it. Something that maybe not so much for your executive committee meetings, but in general, even if you have like a scientific presentation, or if you are in an elevator pitch competition, plant what I call smilers in the audience. They're people that you know are a positive, warm person in your life that you know is going to smile and nod and like give you that good vibes that you need to get through your presentation. It's helpful. Hand gestures. Do they do any good? Yeah, they do a lot of good. They demonstrate your enthusiasm, which is important. They make you appear bolder and more convincing. They can help illustrate abstract points. They help you remember your speech. You'll want to craft them and practice them. You don't want to be like a conductor up at the front, right? You want them to be very strategic, and you want them to help you and not distract from your message. Learn all of the pieces of your pitch separately and out of order. And what I mean by that is, the way to think of it is remind yourself of the flow. Like first I'm going to talk about, how many people in the United States get brain cancer. And then I'm going to talk about why it's so hard to treat and how deadly it is. And then I'm going to talk about, blah, blah, blah. Remind yourself in that way. And in that case, if you accidentally do pause for a moment, you'll remember the order of events of your pitch. You'll want to do a dress rehearsal for yourself. And again, visualize yourself in the same room. This is just one instance, right? This 60 seconds for your executive committee meeting is one example of you using an elevator pitch. But again, you're going to need these throughout your entire career before you go to a conference. If you are, running for the board of something, why would you be the best person to be on the board of whatever? Why do you why are you a proponent of keto or not? I mean, there's a million different reasons why you need an elevator pitch before a job interview. What I do, I actually have a running list of common questions that I see and how I would answer them, just to like remind myself. Very, very helpful. This is my last slide, believe it or not. That is my email. I would love to practice with you. I would love for you to email me your pitch if you need help. We are going to be sending you a survey so that I can get feedback of things you liked about this workshop, things that you would like to change, things you'd like to add to this workshop. But now we have 12 minutes for any questions that you guys may have, or comments, either one.
I have a question, Brittany. As someone who's not a researcher, I struggled to come up with my pitch because I was trying to create a problem. Even though I'm not a researcher, would you still suggest that I go from the angle of a problem, or is there another angle I could go from when I'm doing my elevator pitch?
So your pitch, remind me, is centered around getting the word out and optimizing the RCR. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem would be, maybe the problem would be people just aren't interested, and I don't know this, obviously I'm not a rice, but the problem is people just aren't interested or they don't think RCR is important. My
Okay.
role is to change that, right? So
Okay.
there's a problem. You could say people either just don't show up. So we're trying to be more engaging with the content. People think that these situations may not bother what they're doing, but it actually, or affect them, but it can. You could give an example on, like HIPAA violations. You could talk about the HeLa cells, right? The immortal life of Henrietta Lacks. Like that was one case where regulation wasn't followed, and look what happened, right? So the problem you're trying to solve is to make sure researchers are properly trained in regulations and they understand why it's important and that they buy into that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That was perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
I also struggled with coming up with a problem because I don't have one. I basically need help in creating an elevator speech about myself so that I can go to events and get their elevator speech so I can then bring it back to my boss and say, hey, this is someone that you're going to want to meet, or hey, researcher, this is someone that you're going to want to collaborate with. So I don't have an actual problem.
You do though. You do. And the problem is, maybe, just hear me out. One of the biggest problems in research today is that efforts are siloed and there's a lack of collaboration between laboratories. My role is to help bring people together and serve as a matchmaker to allow this facilitation and collaboration to occur, something like that, right? So the problem is that researchers are siloing their efforts, meaning what one lab is doing may have the opportunity to inform another lab, or they could work together, and they're not doing that because they're not aware of one another. So my role is to help connect the dots between these different research efforts and to matchmake in a sense. So an analogy for you, the matchmaker, right? You're bringing awareness to research. You're shining a light on various research efforts going on within the institution, right?
Yeah, I totally get that. I just for the record, anytime I've ever tried to set anyone up on a date, it's gone awful. Like I'm a terrible matchmaker. Like that's just not my thing. They didn't even talk the same language. So, but I can see how that would be helpful to others.
Yes, yeah. And you would even as your hook say, although in real life, as a social matchmaker, I'm a giant trash can fire, in the research realm, I'm actually quite successful, right? And that's like have a little bit of humor while showing why what you're doing is important and illustrating the problem of research silos.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Yeah, of course. There's always a problem. I can find all the problems. Anyone else? Yeah.
So we do a lot of, I guess events is the right term, but we run a lot of like 3-minute thesis style events. And so my question is a lot of the times I will get oh my God, I can't have a slide. What am I going to do? You know what I mean? Like, what am I going to do? So basically my question is how do I take this amazing information that you've given us and relay it to other people without being rude, without being like, no, I don't really want to hear about that. Cause that's just not necessarily true, but it's not going to fit what we're trying to do in this event, I guess.
So let me see if I understand. They want a slide and you want to get across that they don't need a slide to illustrate their point.
Correct. Yes.
So I would go into it with a preconceived notion. Did you know that you can help get a research question across effectively just with your voice? And you can use things like hand gestures, and you can use things like analogies, and you can use things like metaphors. And if anything, a slide is just distracting from what you're trying to say. And they'd be like, what, how? And then you can either give them the handout for how to do an elevator pitch, but letting them know that, because a lot of people are this way. A lot of people are this way. They think I need slides. I need to show my data for an elevator pitch. No, slides are for a research presentation. There is a time and a place for slides. An elevator pitch should only be your words and your essence, your hand gestures, your enthusiasm. That's all it should be. They're two separate things. That's what I would say.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Go ahead, Stacey.
Oh, yes, I have a question. So I guess I'm struggling with trying to get the hook to sound natural. That's kind of the struggle I'm going with. So I too am on Danny and Andrea and Aretha and Suzanne's team. And so I am the event planner and focus on outreach. So I'm a program manager for both of those. So my whole thing is I have a hook, but it sounds like not natural. So how do I get it to sound natural in those communication times?
I would keep practicing it and put it into language that you would normally use, right? Like even have a conversation with a friend or someone and say, listen, this is my pitch. What's a more me way of saying this? And most people who know you well enough would be like, well, you would say it this way. They'd actually be able to tell you better than you could tell yourself. How would I say something? And how would I make this more natural? And that's too, I think, is an important point. And I say this walking down memory lane. I'll never forget when I was in 8th grade, my science teacher told me the way I spoke made me sound stupid. She used the word stupid, and that stuck with me for the rest of my life. And I remember trying to change the way I spoke. And I always just felt like an imposter. I'm like, I don't have a deep voice. That's not how I speak. No one should ever tell you how to change the way you speak. They can give you pointers like a fast talker. I can still talk fast, but I just pause between my sentences. I can still have a high-pitched voice and be enthusiastic, right? So you should speak in such a way that you're comfortable with how you're speaking. It's the only way you'll sound authentic. It will come across better and really like love who you are, celebrate who you are. Stacey, I didn't even know you. You're an awesome person, right? So you want to be you and have your essence come across. Another reason why I love that Ionic Liquids example, because she was so unapologetically authentic and endearing, right? I want to like have a cup of coffee with her and give her a hug. Like I liked her, right? I immediately trusted her because she was authentic. So that's what everybody should be. Sorry, my TED Talk is over. Any other questions or thoughts?
So for me, I kind of struggle explaining what I do to a non-scientific person at parties. Like when I go out with my husband, he's in architecture, work for a nonprofit. I'm like, what do you do? And I'm like, and he doesn't even know what I do. So in terms of analogies, you have to come up with like multiple analogies until they get your point. That's my hard part.
What you can do is introduce an analogy at the beginning and then delicately refer to it throughout the rest of your pitch. So like fire ant could be my targeted, or let's see, yeah. Fire ant would be, the fire ant killer would be my targeted therapy. Okay. The ability to deliver it across my entire backyard would be a novel delivery mechanism, right? So you essentially introduce the idea and the analogy in the beginning and then refer to it throughout. And it allows them to remember how it relates to something that they would know in their real life. And it's a thing, you think you can't do it. And you think, not you, but many people within their niche scientific field, they think there's no way someone couldn't understand. But we just saw an example of ionic liquid, something that I never even heard of before. And I immediately understood, right? Do I know every single intricate detail of her research? No, but I know enough that would need to be conveyed in an elevator pitch to where I'd want to know more, right? And you can do that based on your research. It just takes really writing it all out, which is what we did before the first break, writing it all out, and then essentially find, replace, go through and say, ask your husband, do you know what this word means? No? Okay. Let me think of another way. If I say this word, now do you understand what that means? Yes. Okay. And then just keep moving along and then ultimately give the whole pitch and have him repeat it back to you.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, everyone. Well, you have my email address. Again, I'll put it in the chat, but it's bcparker@mdanderson.org. I would love to help you however you need. And thank you so much for first the invitation to do this, and secondly, for your time, attention, and participation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was
Thank you.
awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was amazing.
You guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.